Hello, I'm Donald Leggett and welcome to this latest edition of Share Views brought to you by London South East. Our guest today is Paul Vonk, Managing Director of Angus Energy, the leading onshore UK oil production and development company, who have just announced a joint venture with Cuadrilla Energy and Lucas Energy. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you, Donald. Thanks for having us.
You guys have been incredibly busy.
Yes, we have been.
So, a joint venture with Cuadrilla and Lucas Energy. Give me the rationale for that joint venture.
Well, we just announced a transaction whereby we will be joining the Cuadrilla and Lucas partnership for £4 million. We'll gain a 25% interest in the Balcombe license. And the Balcombe license is really in the sweet spot of the Weald Basin. And ever since our IPO back in November 2016, we've always been focused on the Weald Basin. We own the Balcombe production field, we own Litzy, and we were the company that drilled the Horshill license and did the Horshill discovery.
There are some who might say that you should have dealt with the challenges at the Litzy and Balcombe fields rather than jumping off into a new joint venture and going for gold that way.
Well, that is one way of looking at it. We looked at it differently, and it's important to note that the Balcombe license has just received approval, all the planning approvals, to do their 7-day well test, which is crucial because they drilled a beautiful horizontal well back in 2013, but they never came around to testing it. So this license is in the most beautiful spot in the Weald Basin. It's really in the center. It's got the thickest skim-rich layers. They've drilled a beautiful horizontal well through the best limestone in it, and they've just received the planning approvals to switch it on. Now, Cuadrilla and Lucas are both very competent companies, but Cuadrilla is very busy up north, and the Weald, that's Angus' sweet spot. That's where we work. So we went up to them with a proposal and say, hey, we'd really like that asset. It really fits in our strategy. So would you like to do a deal with us? So we were able to convince them that this would be, in the best interest of all parties. And these assets just don't come available. We really had to work hard on this. And we could have potentially waited until we, for example, switched on Balcombe from the Kimmeridge, but there's no guarantee that that license would have still been available, and if it would have been available, then it would not have been at the current valuations, and the relative dilution could have potentially been much, much higher, because it's a much larger acreage position. It increases our acreage position by 3 times. Just by getting a 25% interest in.
So essentially that's the investment rationale for shareholders. That's why it's a good deal for shareholders in your view.
Absolutely. It's a relatively small dilution for long-term shareholder gain.
Do you think the shareholders may take a while to get their heads around this?
Well, that's one of the reasons I'm sitting here with you, to better explain the rationale for this transaction. And that's what we need to do as a board, and explain why we're making these decisions. Because people might look saying your share price is a little bit low. No, you have to look at the relative valuation for doing these deals. And if you look at it that way, no, this is a really important strategic transaction for us. And we're really happy that we managed to enter into this transaction.
And could you unravel the money for me? You've been raising £3 million and another couple of £1 million. What's your balance sheet looking like? And give me the financials of the deal.
Well, our balance sheet is looking very good at the moment. We switched Litzy number 2 on when we drilled it in November. The initial rates were disappointing. So we looked at it. Okay, we need to have a clean balance sheet and make sure that we've got all the funding going forward. And we were already working on this transaction. We knew that we wanted to do this. So we did a £3 million raise, and just to give us the firepower, and more importantly, make an exclusivity payment without having to make any announcements to the market. So we already had part of that 3 million was allocated to this potential transaction. And then, following the announcement of this transaction, we raised an additional 2 million. So for now, we've got a very healthy balance sheet. And don't forget, we're also switching our conventional wells that we're producing historically back on. So together with that production and the money we have in the bank, we're in a good financial position. So
from the outsider's point of view, it looks opportunistic, but it's actually highly strategic from what you're telling me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Our focus from the beginning has always been on opening up the Kimmeridge in the Weald Basin in southern England. This will be transformational. We have a fantastic position at Balcombe, which has a production license, and we're looking to put that into production, the Kimmeridge into production from Balcombe. But size-wise, look at the acreage position. Cuadrilla stepped into this place years before us, and they had first choice, to put it this way, because people stopped looking at it after the 80s. They came back and they got the nicest part, because if you if you look at where we drilled Horsell back in 2014, we flow tested that in 2016 very successfully, and we're increasing our understanding that it's a fractured basin with interbedded shales and limestone. And if you go to the north, Horsell flowed about 1,200 barrels a day in aggregate from 2 limestones in the Kimmeridge. But it's thinning out to the north. If you go to the center, where Balcombe is, it is 50% thicker. It was depositioned at a deeper depth, so the maturity is better, so the conditions to making oil are better. So at Horsell it was great, at Balcombe it should be much better.
So give me a sense of the potential of Balcombe in barrels of oil per day. Well,
it is not as straightforward as historically, when people were going after conventional structural traps, where you can say, okay, we've got a structural trap, it is this size, it is this porosity, this permeability, you can give decent judgments about expected flow rates.
It doesn't work like that way.
No, because it's a fractured reservoir. So the flow rates that came out of Horsell were significantly above what people were expecting in the beginning. And then we realized afterwards that the oil is actually coming from the fractures. That's why we can produce it conventionally. People might say it's a shale, but we can produce it conventionally because the fractures are already there. But determining flow rates from a fractured system is complicated. You really have to do it in order to come up with sustainable production rates.
Okay, what are the next steps for Balcombe? When do you start your flow tests and so on?
Well, so Balcombe is now fully permitted from a planning perspective to do the 7-day well test. And that is crucial because that's a horizontal well through a beautiful limestone. So it's I think about 1,600 feet long, and we're trying to hit as many fractures as are there in order to get the best production rates out of it. Find out what the maximum flow rates are and what the sustainable flow rates are in that 7-day period. The equipment that we have to use for that is basically the same equipment that we have to use at Balcombe. So one of the things that we're discussing now with our partners, because there's not that many testing spreads around here in onshore UK, is that it would save us a lot of cost if we mobilize it to Balcombe, do the 7-day well test first, and then move it to Balcombe. Because the mobilization costs are one of the biggest costs in getting any oil field equipment in. So that is the things that we're discussing with the partners right there. We're going to discuss with the local community. We're setting a community liaison group to make sure that the 7-day well test that we're going to do there will not interfere, with the local community. And when that's done, we'll revert back to the market with the exact plan after we also discussed it with our partners.
What kind of timescale are we looking at, do you think?
Well, I would sincerely hope that we can do Balcombe and have Balcombe properly into production both comfortably before the summer.
Before the summer sounds good. I'm going to remind you of something disappointing. Broadford Bridge produced disappointing results from its wells. Why do you think it's not going to be Broadford Bridge all over again?
Well, we're not the operator of Broadford Bridge. But
it must have made you go,
well, let's be honest, the valuations of all the different wheel players would have been significantly different if that would have been a successful well test from the beginning. I mean, it's a long-term game, it's complicated. What is very important to note from Broadford Bridge is when the cores came to surface, those cores, they showed that it's really a fractured system, and those fractures contain the movable hydrocarbons. So in theory, the formation looks exactly as we hoped, and it looked fantastic. But then you have to say, okay, well, how is a well being drilled? So for example, under a scenario that you use water-based mud and you hit a fracture system in the shales, then you're going to have a lot of losses. And in order to stem those losses, what people do, they add like bentonite as an additive to the water-based mud, and that kind of stops the losses. It stops the losses by sealing the fracture system. Well, unfortunately, the fracture system is what you want to get access to. So when you then come to the subsequent testing phase and the bentonite is still there and it seals off your fractures, it's very difficult to get production from it. So from where we're standing and we're the outsiders, then it looks like it's our operational issues with the well which can be resolved, but it's not a formation problem. And that is really key to understand. Therefore, there's not a read-through of what's happening at Broadford Bridge at the moment, what will happen at Balcombe and what will happen at Balcombe.
Okay, let's take a pull back and take an overview. Onshore oil and gas production has proved pretty controversial in the UK. You yourselves have fallen foul previously of Surrey County Council and fracking protesters. Here you are taking on Balcombe. What do you think reaction is going to be? Have you got a better relationship with Surrey County Council and your protesters?
No, we've been in the last months and year, we've been working really hard in order to improve our communication. We've been working very hard with Surrey County Council and resolving any misunderstandings that there were in the past. Is Balcombe, which is going really well. We're really happy.
No fracking for a start. That seems to be a clear message.
That
Conventional.
that is our only message. And we're not doing fracking. We're producing from an unconventional reservoir in a conventional way. And it's very important for people to realize these sites that we operate have been there for years. You know, Balcombe and Litzy have been there for 20, 30 years. They have been producing oil successfully with basically without anybody realizing that they're there. That is exactly what we're continuing. Nobody's going to industrialize the Weald. That's not going to happen.
Am I getting the sense that the gap with Gusher and all the 100 million or the billion barrels a day lines that were whizzing around the media have done you no good whatsoever?
Short term, no, none whatsoever. No, it showed people what the potential is, but it went the wrong way around. You first need to flow it properly, and then you can say there's X, and this is how we're going to do it, and it's great for the UK.
But it made you all sound as though you were a little bit crazy.
Well, we were never involved in any of those statements. We were private at the time. We drilled the wells. We found it. We flowed it. But you know, communication is done by a variety of parties, and we stick to our own party line, and we want to prove and produce first before we make wild statements. But let's not forget, it is a very exciting basin. Okay,
Litzy and Balcombe. So what happens there? Will work continue there, if not testing?
Yeah. At Balcombe, what we're doing right now, we apped a few pictures saying that we're actually switching on the number 2 well. The number 2 well is the well that always produced from the Portland. We switched it off back in 2016 to do the site upgrades, and then the oil price environment was like $30 per barrel. In the current oil price environment, even these small wells, when you start adding them up, they're really economical. So we're switching that one back on. Then later this month, we're going to switch on Litzy number 1, which has a very low decline rate and produced for a long time. And more importantly, we're going to improve the pump position. We're going to use a different pump and improve the position, so we should be able to get better flow rates from Litzy number 2. So then we'll have
Litzy number 2. The flow rates were initially disappointing. Is that right?
It is always. It was indeed disappointing. There's a variety of factors. And when we install the new pump, we should have a better understanding of what's happening with that one. But
you did say you were going to have that done by February.
Yeah.
Will it be done by February?
It will happen in February. It might together with Litzy 1, it might slip, you know, a day or two. But basically, we will be doing the operations in February.
We'll forgive you a day or two. You saying you put out an RNS a couple of weeks ago, which said that you will have 4 wells operating in Q1. Is that still where you're at?
Well, this transaction changed it slightly. Like I was alluding to earlier, it provides a lot of synergies, this Balcombe transaction, because we're getting more in our core area. So it should reduce the unit cost. And one of the major components of cost in a well test is the mobilization fee. They're really extraordinary. So we will have 3 wells in production Q1. No argument about that, but there's a financial rationale to say, okay, let's do Balcombe first and then move that same equipment and the same team over to Balcombe. So
you're going for the best first, essentially. So there's a very clear economic rationale.
No, also it's a 7-day well test. So what happens if I do Balcombe first? Then I've got all the good equipment and testing equipment of, you know, you really need to find hard to get the good stuff stuck in Balcombe, and it will stay there for as long as we have the approvals from the OGA to do this long-term production testing, basically production, but it's long-term production testing. So, okay. But Balcombe it's really good.
What do the next 2 quarters look like for you? Final question.
Very busy, very busy. We in the next 2 quarters will basically give the proof of what we came as a management team and as a board in November 2016 and said, guys, we want to IPO. We've got good conventional assets, but there's significant upside with the Kimmeridge. Well, we are getting the maximum assets, and in addition to that, we should have 2 wells producing from the Kimmeridge, 1 via test and 1 in long-term production. So it's going to be a very exciting time for us.
Okay, Paul Vonk, Managing Director, Angus Energy. That was a fascinating update. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, thanks to you for watching.
Thank you, Donald.